Hi, I'm just adding some pencil touches on a small landscape I did. It's a 9 by 12 in watercolor. And I used the following colors. I used more colors on this one. I used ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, cadmium yellow orange, cadmium lemon yellow, sap green, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, and cadmium red deep. So if you're interested to see how I did this, there's a short demo coming up that goes through the various steps. So I wanted to thank you for watching and also wanted to encourage you to keep practicing. Thanks. Today I'm going to talk about this watercolor study I'm doing. It's a small study about 9 inches high and 12 inches wide on 140-pound cold pressed watercolor paper. And what I'm doing here is I moisten the paper very lightly and I'm putting in some sky. I start with cobalt blue and I add some cerulean blue as I get closer to the mountain area. I keep the paper moist. I don't over wet it. That's the way that I work. And I just pull the color down with a moist brush into the moistened paper. So you can see I'm working with it now this way. As I get closer to those mountaintops, on this particular piece, I'm not going to necessarily extend the color into those mountains. I keep my sections dry a lot of times based on what I need to do. I don't always wet the entire sheet of paper and I don't always put color down immediately. I work more in sections. And right now I'm just adding some extra color and working it and pulling it with a damp brush, and here I'm lifting some things in a hope to create some clouds. You just take a tissue paper and while the paint is still wet, lift it gently and almost manipulate the white by lifting it and taking the color away to create some clouds. And we're going to go ahead and continue on this piece and soften those edges by the mountains. Alrighty, now we're starting those mountains in the distance. We don't want to make them too predominant. We're working with something called atmospheric perspective. The further something is away from you, the lighter the color is. And I'm just using a very light mix that I dump into, or touch into really, the damp paper of lemon yellow and some sap green. And I've worked some darks in the crevices to give the illusion of depth. And I'm going to just go ahead and do that on the far range. And then as it gets closer, I'm pulling in a little stronger color on the next row of mountains. Again, working on this particular piece section by section, moistening the paper section by section and pulling the paint through. Alrighty, I've added some darks to differentiate between one row of mountains and the other, and the darks I made were with ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson to get a purple. And now I'm adding, dropping in onto moistened paper, some burnt sienna, some cadmium yellow, little bit of green, again keeping it very diffuse and moistening the paper little by little as I work with it. Now I'm on the second layer of mountains, getting closer and closer to the foreground, and I've made the colors a bit brighter, but I'm still adding that dark mixture of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue to create a purple. Purple and yellow are complementary colors, and if you put complementary colors together in your painting, those areas will tend to pop more. Your eye will be drawn to them. I work a lot with complementary colors. I like yellows and golds and purples. And now I'm moving on to the next layer of mountains, and I'm trying to make them more distinct by using some brighter colors. Not distinct, but making them look like they're closer by using brighter colors. And I'm using a burnt sienna and dropping in some cadmium, yellow, and a little bit of green. Burnt sienna is a red. Red tends to draw your eye in a painting. Points of red are always good to use in a painting. All right, now we're moving on to the mountains that are going to be closest to where we're standing. And I've pulled in a little bit of green, pulling that down. It's end of fall, end of the pretty color season. When the leaves are the brightest, they start dimming after a while. Still a little bit of green and a little yellow in the leaves. Pulling in some burnt sienna again, trying to keep the colors more vivid because they are closer to you. Dropping in greens and sometimes some purples here and there just to give a little bit more texture and more variety. There's a good dark coming in here, a very deep purplish green. Again, using that burnt sienna, using that ultramarine blue and ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. I'm thinking of my feet. And also green, putting in some dark green in there. Okay, we're getting to the section where you're standing looking at the mountains in the distance, but this would be more of your foreground section. I wet the paper here and decided just to throw in some random splotches of color onto that wet paper and just manipulate it with my brush. I basically am using one size brush on this piece. It's a 1/2 inch flat. I keep it very clean. I clean my brush between picking color up. I wipe it with a paper towel. I dab it on a sponge just to keep color from mixing in too much. Sometimes you want the color to mix in on the paper and get some different effects, but I'm trying to keep a little bit more control of it, making this a little bit more abstract and a little bit looser as we get closer to the foreground. Okay, getting close to finishing that foreground. I'm just dabbing touches of burnt sienna here and there. I really, when I do these quick studies, I just go with instinct and intuition and what I feel will work. I'm always prepared to lift and move and manipulate. I have a Kleenex in my left hand. I'm right-handed. I paint right-handed, but I have Kleenex in my left hand ready to lift while the paint is dry. I can lift when the paint is, I lift when the paint is dry, and I can lift when it's wet, which is the preferable way to do it. And we're just going to add some more browns mixed with greens, and then some dark purples and browns and shadows here and there, just to give a little bit more texture to the piece. Alright, almost done with that foreground. A lot of darks into that tree. You have to think in terms of where your light's coming from. On this one, I'm really not sure because I have no actual reference for this particular painting other than a similar piece a student of mine did in class that we worked on together. It's basically from my imagination, but I've added some darks, and now I'm going to go ahead and finish up on the left-hand side. There's some of those hills extended. I have a bad tendency of forgetting to finish things on the sides of my paintings. Don't do that. Always try to carry the color over that you've had in the main area of your painting. For instance, those hills that are in the background, the atmospheric perspective, matching that color. Again, this is a very loose piece, so exact color matching is not as necessary as if you were doing something with a lot of fine detail. Okay, we're getting to finishing the left-hand side that I left blank. You saw a little bit of that tissue action. I always had one in my hand. When I started learning how to paint, somebody told me, always keep a tissue in your hand. Tissues work better than paper towels. Paper towels are too thick, too heavy, have too much of a pattern. The tissue is perfect for lifting color. Now I'm sitting and nothing's going on because I'm thinking, what is my next step? How am I going to pursue this? Do I add more detail? Do I add more washes? Do I go ahead and throw more shadow under the tree? I paint on the fly a lot when I do these quick studies, so I don't pre-plan. I just go ahead and attack it. So it looks like what we're going to do is going to go ahead and start working on that beautiful pine tree over on the left-hand side. And I'm using a very strong mixture of sap green and French ultramarine or ultramarine blue, and just laying in color. I moistened the paper somewhat. Nope, there's an oopsie. I didn't like too much ultramarine blue. I like to keep my colors lively, fresh, not necessarily realistic when I'm doing these. I can paint realistically, but I most enjoy putting in random color where you least expect it, like that ultramarine blue. I'm also dropping in, as I moisten the paper, just some plain sap green and also some burnt sienna, which is your reddish brown. Red and green are complementary colors and make a nice statement. When you're using a complementary color, your eye will go there and it'll make your colors and your painting pop more. I use a lot of burnt sienna and sap green when I paint foliage and trees. And now I'm just sort of putting lighter mixes of color on this tree and actually dropping in water here and there and really manipulating the paint, not painting it so dry. Okay, continuing to add color, lifting here and there, adding some darks, and maybe some purples. I like to vary my color. And then I just wet my brush where I think areas are way, way too dark. And I lift with a wet brush and manipulate it. Always remember to clean your brush in between picking color up. And that'll keep the color pure and more vibrant. Here I'm just pulling some of those dark colors through, evening things out. I sometimes will just put heavy colors in and with a wet brush manipulate them that way, giving it motion, giving it light and dark values. And now we're going to go into creating some shadows, some purple underneath, to kind of anchor that tree, even though there is like no direct sunlight on this and not sure where the light is coming from. The tree will cast its own shadow normally. Look at nature. You'll learn how to paint by just observing nature, and if you're doing landscapes. And you remember these things when you start putting your brush to paper. For my shadows, I'm using a mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, like I used previously on the mountains, but in a deeper value, more saturated. And I'll be moving that paint in and manipulating it to get approximate a tree shadow. And then I'm just going to start adding some of those darks and some indication of leaves and twigs and grasses and branches in the immediate foreground. I'm putting in some random horizontal lines to kind of break up the vertical grasses here and there. Again, we have no point of reference. We have no need to make it realistic. We paint what we feel and what we think should be there. This is your painting, or in this case, my painting, and I make it what I want it to be. Here I'm pulling some vertical lines from the horizontal wet paint that I put down and with a semi-dry brush to create an illusion of grasses, leaves, and various detritus that's in the foreground where you would be standing. Don't overdo it. I've overdone it, and it's tough to correct afterwards. My instincts are telling me that we're almost done, but I can't help but fiddle just a little bit. So I'm dropping in some cadmium yellow to kind of brighten things up a little bit. This is a critical stage for me personally, because this is where I want to keep fiddling and changing things and don't feel it's good enough, or gee, I should have done it differently. And on something this small that isn't planned, you really can only fiddle so much before you actually kill it. so to speak. You don't want to kill your painting. You want it to be lively and effervescent and fresh and alive. Now, I just switched brushes to a very trusty rigger brush that I have, very thin bristles, and I'm still pulling some of those grasses up from the wet paint just to give it a little bit more texture. The thing with watercolor is it's sometimes hard to get texture with it, so you have to work with multiple layers and washes, and dry brushing is really good. I like to dry brush leaves and grasses like I'm doing here, and just doing a little bit more pulling of that color up. I'm adding a little bit of alizarin crimson, cadmium red, just dainty points of color, really, really subtle, just to pop things a little bit more. I use the side of my brush a lot when I'm doing this. The paint has to be relatively dry. You can't do it with very wet paint and paper. So kind of moist, semi-wet. You can get a lot of effects by using the side of your brush and scraping things and moving things around. Don't always use the point of your brush. Loosen up when you paint. Don't sit and feel cramped. Use your entire arm. I found that has helped me a lot when I do work. And now we're pretty much finished with this. And this is where I have to tell myself to step back and take a look at it and decide I am done and sign my name. In red this time. I try to keep it close to the color harmony of the painting so it doesn't jump out too much. So there you go. That's the demo of this lovely hillside scene. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to keep practicing and have a good day.